Yeah, that's devastating. How much
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. First of all, I want to say thank you so much for being here. I want to thank the University of Dallas for hosting us. I also want to thank the Tocqueville Society here at UD and the Young Conservatives of Texas for collaborating with us on this event. My name is Josie, and I work at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute. We are an educational nonprofit. We were founded in 1953 by William F. Buckley Jr., and our mission is to educate for liberty. We have 131 active student societies at universities across the United States. They range from debate societies to reading groups to philosophy clubs to current events discussion groups, and we support our societies in a variety of ways. We keep our students engaged with resources such as books, podcasts, articles. We connect our students to faculty at their own universities. We also assist student leaders in scheduling guest lectures and seminars. We program regional conferences, and we connect our students to a vast alumni network. We're so excited to be here with you tonight. If you have any questions about our programming or ISI in general, feel free to reach out to me. Just come up, say hi after the debate. I will be around. And now, of course, it's time for me to introduce these lovely people who are here with us tonight. So over on, I guess I should say it's your right. We have Neal McCluskey. He's the director of the Cato Institute's Center for Educational Freedom. He is the author or editor of several books, including School Choice Myths, Setting the Record Straight on Education Freedom, co-edited with Corey DeAngelis, and author of the forthcoming The Fractured Schoolhouse, Re-examining Education for a Free, Equal, and Harmonious Society. He also runs Cato's Public Schooling Battle Map, a database of values and identity-based conflicts in public schools. He has a PhD in public policy from George Mason University. Ryan James Gerdusky is a writer, political consultant, author, and the founder of the 1776 Project PAC, a super PAC dedicated to supporting conservative candidates for school board elections nationwide. Before starting the 1776 Project PAC, he worked on campaigns for 15 years. From 2015 to 2017, he worked for the Washington Examiner's millennial website, Red Alert Politics, and in 2020, his first book, They're Not Listening: How the Elites Created the National Populist Revolution, was published. Our moderator, Karol Markowicz, is a weekly columnist at the New York Post and Fox News, contributing editor at The Spectator, and a contributing writer to Washington Examiner magazine. She's also written for Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Newsweek, Time, Jewish Forward, National Review, Daily Beast, Business Insider, Haaretz, and many others. She appears regularly on Fox News, Newsmax, OANN, and Fox Business Network, and is featured frequently on national radio programs. She is currently writing a book on how wokeness destroys childhood. Karol was born in the Soviet Union and grew up in Brooklyn. She lives in South Florida with her husband and 3 children. And now we'll get into our debate, which is we're going to be answering the question, can K-12 education be saved? So I'm going to pass this off to our moderator.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. We're going to kick off with 5-minute introductions. I'm going to pass it to...
Great. Well, thank you. I want to thank, first of all of you for coming. ISI for putting this together, the University of Dallas, for hosting it. I just have to say one thing because I think that there's some strategery going on. Ryan, I was on your Twitter account and I saw your banner is Boarded Up Cato Institute.
Yes.
And I was like, I'm triggered. I got to go to a safe space because this is really frightening. But I'm okay now. So I know you were getting ready for this, but I've recovered. So at one point, the title, I think, of this was, Is it too late to save our schools? And I wanted to pick up on one part of that in particular to sort of frame, just give you a basic idea of where I'm coming from and hopefully give food for thought for the debate. And I wanted to focus a little bit on that term, our. Is it too late to save our schools? And the key question is, what do we mean by ours? And that is really the crux of the public schooling problem, is what do we mean when we say these are our schools? Because the reality is, the basic idea of public schools is we're going to require diverse people, diverse backgrounds, diverse values, diverse needs, desires, concepts of what education should be, and we're going to put them all into one school. That could be your one school you're assigned to, it could be your district, with a lot of state control, it could be your state. But when we say we're going to put diverse people in one school, we are ultimately saying it's actually going to be the school for some people, because what dictates what happens in that school is who can accumulate really the most political power. And of course, we know people disagree. I think the reason we're having this debate is because we have seen very clearly over the last 18 months or so, kind of zero-sum disagreements, where there is very little ability to compromise. Probably the masks are the best illustration of this. If you think that your child is safest in a school where masks are mandatory, you cannot compromise with someone who says, it should be my choice whether that child wears a mask. But this is not really new. I mean, masks, we've seen it the most clearly recently, but you can go throughout history, but just recently, of course, we're having lots of debates about critical race theory. And it's usually not the case that you can compromise away curriculum if people think something is really important and other people think it's really unacceptable. Sometimes we just go to lowest common denominator and then nobody gets what they want. But we end up having these very sort of personal divisive clashes because we say our schools, but there's schools that you have to have political power to control. And it's not just these values kind of battles, and thank you for mentioning the public schooling battle map, which I'm constantly trying to promote to people, which is a map where you can, it's fun, unless you don't like the fact we have values and identity-based conflicts around the country, but they illustrate these kinds of zero-sum battles that the public schools force us into. And the idea of public schooling was originally to unify, but it makes no logical sense to say forcing diverse people to one system will make them come together. What it does is it leads to this conflict. So you could go to the public schooling battle map and see lots of illustrations of this. But it's not just even those really personal things we fight about. We fight about how you teach math. There is fundamental disagreement about how you teach math. If some of you remember the Common Core debate, a lot of it was just about what is the right sequence of math, and we simply didn't agree on it. And it means a lot if you think your child is not learning math properly. We battle about when you should start the school day. What's the right time to get the right balance of parents going to work, kids having to do sports practice, when you get the right amount of sleep. So you can see this problem. Disagreement is not something that public schools can handle. Diversity is not something that they can handle. And then we don't even necessarily agree on what the end goal of education is. And this goes back to really the beginning of public schooling history. You go back to Horace Mann and even before him, talking about, is the job of education, is the goal to provide skills so that people can earn a living and be productive in the economy? Is it moral development where they are good people and they learn the right values? And then, of course, we have historically lots of battles about what are the right values. We tend to think it started with Protestant Catholic conflicts in public schools, but it really started in Massachusetts with battles among Protestants, kind of Orthodox Protestants and Unitarians, about what those schools will teach. And if you want to learn more about this, there's a great book called The Myth of the Common School by Charlie Glenn that lays out these sorts of fundamental battles we have. So my hope is not to say this concept, ultimately, of our schools means the school we assign all sorts of people to based on their home address. That really makes no sense, and it's, I think, ultimately inconsistent with a free society. What I would like is one where we have a true kind of us, where people choose schools, and that's a community that they're choosing. That truly is us, when you are in a school with other people who have all selected to be there, as opposed to the us of, you're going there whether you like it or not, and you can fight out what those schools are doing. Now, a lot of people say, well, you just want to get rid of public schools. But the fact of the matter is people would still choose public schools. I am not from Texas, but I know I am in Texas. I don't know a whole lot about Texas culture, but I did watch Friday Night Lights recently, all the way through a marathon. And if it's accurate, I know that the public school and the football team is important to a lot of communities in Texas. And that's fine. What's important is that people choose that. The money follows the child, and if that's what they want, great, that's what they get. If not, they need to be able to choose something else. So ultimately, I don't want the us of you are assigned to this, and us is who we arbitrarily put you with. I want us to mean the community that you voluntarily join. Thank you.
Ryan?
Yeah, give him a round of applause.
So my name is Ryan Gerdusky, and my journey to really care about education started only last year. I come from a very large family in New York City. I'm the oldest of 36 first cousins, and every one of them is younger than I am. And one day when everyone was virtually learning, my godson, who was 9 at the time, was asked to read a book called Race Cars, about how police profile black cars and not white cars. And everyone in the family was incensed, everyone in the school was incensed about the situation with the teacher. And I've been involved in local politics for 15 years, and I said, what can we do? And I said, I can start maybe a PAC to do school board elections and flip school boards. So I started the 1776 Project PAC last year. In our first year, we did 58 school board races across the country, and we won 42 of them. For candidates who oppose things like critical race theory, DEI, SEL, DI being diversity, equity, and inclusion, SEL being social emotional learning, as well as the masking and a lot of things that are happening with the transgender ideology in school, especially for young children. So that's really where I come from in the background of my entire position now on education. So I will say, I think that one, yes, you can save schools and you can save public schools. And most importantly for conservatives, we have to try. And I will say this, I support school choice. I support vouchers for religious education. I support homeschooling. I support schooling for specialized schooling for emotionally challenged children or developmentally challenged children. But I will say this, during 2021, during the height of COVID, when basically the whole country's public schools had closed, 76% of American children still went to public schools, even though they didn't have a public school to go to. When homeschooling was an option, when private schools were taking kids at a higher rate than ever, they still chose public school. And the year after that, in 2021, that number jumped to 83%, and it's expected to jump to 86% today. Americans really like public education. They prefer it in many cases. Some cases, their only option in many broad parts of the rural parts of the country or in some inner city areas where there is no or little market value to creating a private education, but parents overall do like public education. They want to keep it going. And I will say this also for people who support private schools or who have thought that private education is the way to push forward conservative ideology. There is no silver bullet. Most private schools, including religious schools, are as woke and as progressive on race politics as public education is. Some far more so. It is certainly true in the most elite private schools, especially K-12, like Dalton, Grace Church, that they are far more progressive than your average public school are. And those are the elite private schools where those children go on to Harvard and Yale and then go on to run the country. And there's also the NAIS, which is the National Association of Independent Schools, which is 1,400 schools nationwide. They make Randy Weingartner look like she works for Cato Institute. They are very, very, very progressive on all the woke race stuff that conservatives scream about for the public education. There isn't going to be a natural answer if we move more to private education that will naturally solve a lot of our problems with that. I will say that in the last year that I've been doing this effort to sit there and push for more parental involvement in public education to fight for more school board elections, I've become aware of the recent history, not the recent history, but the history of the last century of conservative victories. Conservatives like to sit there and claim defeat constantly. We constantly say we can't win any fight, but actually in the last 100 years of public education, we really have. There was the Citizens for Excellence in Education, which was founded in the 40s and 50s, which pushed for school prayer, which obviously didn't happen because of the Supreme Court, but in the meantime, they flipped over 1,000 school board seats. There was the Education Research Analysis in the 1950s, which changed textbooks for 20 years in some of these states. And they were so successful that the NEA, which is, as left as anyone goes, in the 1950s, kicked openly card-carrying socialists out of their party by 1950. out of public schools in 1950. They made it so you could not be a public school teacher to be a card-carrying communist. That was how successful conservatives were throughout the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s, and that may seem like it was a long time ago. However, we're seeing some of that success today. If you look in Florida with Governor DeSantis, a lot of teachers who are activists, who have pushed critical race theory and DEI and SEL throughout public education have quit because he is at war with woke professors and woke teachers and K through 12. And where you don't have a Governor DeSantis, like in Colorado, which is a pretty blue state, Colorado Springs abolished their DEI, their diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the school board became conservative. There is answers. Even in Texas, just 2 days ago, 2 incumbent Republican members of your state school board lost. 2 incumbent Republicans lost to conservative challengers who said you're not hard enough on DEI and SEL. It is completely possible to reform public education, but more importantly, it is important to realize where the people are. 83% of kids are going to be in public school. We cannot abandon them or hope that there will magically be a silver bullet to sit there and to reform all schools, make them more privatized. You know, conservatives, ironically, the one area of institutional power we have left is the government. We've lost control of the private sector, we've lost control of business, we've lost control of the media, we've lost control of academia. The one area we actually have leverage in is in the power of the government. And I believe that we could do positive reforms for education to make children excel, to fight against race-based politics in education, and to offer more opportunity in education for all children. So that's my position of it. Thank you.
When I was asked to moderate this panel, I said very humbly, I am the best moderator for this because I'm a fan of both Neal and Ryan, and I don't know who I agree with on this. I'm very much for school choice, but do I want public schools to disappear? I don't know. So I'm very looking forward to hearing out these arguments. Before you tear each other's arguments apart, I wanted to ask, which argument of your opponent do you think resonates the most with other people? You go first.
I think Neal's argument of trying to put the money behind the child resonates a lot. I think people would like more opportunity and choice, especially for middle class or lower middle class families. However, can I just have one little critique to it? However, the problem that I feel with that is that, one, market competition is not available in parts of this country that we have to admit. In rural America and urban America, there'll be no market force for it. No teacher is going to want to be in a very high crime community. You'll have a massive, a massively difficult time retaining teachers in difficult communities, and in rural communities there'll be not enough children to offer 50 different market incentives. Certain times of education, you have to do things at a financial loss. But for the rest of the country, I do think that they absolutely want opportunity. I want opportunity too, so I agree with Neal with that.
Yeah, well, you know, I think that part of this is going to be not so much disagreement as looking, I think, at different time frames. So Ryan's absolutely right that if you look at polling, which I think is more important indicator of whether or not people like public schools than whether they go there, polling shows that 70% of people give their local schools an A or B, which means most people would want to be there. I don't like to use the percentages because it's a really unfair competition when you say, well, they're choosing the schools they've already had to pay for that are free to the user, versus what would they choose if that money were portable. I think you'd see a lot more people going to private options to include homeschooling. But I think you're absolutely right that a lot of people like public school, their public schools, and they like the concept of public schooling. And I actually would say that I am agnostic on who wins, liberals, conservatives, on public school issues, because I want choice to be what operates. But you're doing what the incentives are in public schooling, which is to control the school board or control the state. And I'm much happier if most of the conflicts or the political debate is at the school board level. I'd rather see sort of subsidiarity of local communities competing or hashing out disagreements than have it centralized. So my argument isn't that we're going to eliminate public schools tomorrow, because absolutely we're not, because you couldn't do it, and because people like it. I want to see down the road that the norm becomes people expect the ability to choose a school with their money.
Okay, and now let's tear apart each other's arguments. What's the weakest part of his argument?
I think the weakest part of Neal's argument comes in the terms that freedom should be our ultimate property, the ultimate value of our education. I reject that entirely. I don't want 50 schools offering children lessons on how to hate yourself if you're born white or feel you're oppressor if you're born black. I don't want schools to sit there and give them the choice to sit there and say America is a terrible nation. I think that if it's a tax dollar, if even in Neal's scenario of tax dollars are following students, is a public good. So for me, I don't have children, but I pay a lot in taxes for other people's children to go to school. And what do I expect from a public school education or any kind of education involving tax dollars? You come out knowing enough to function in general society to get a job, so you will support the system as you get older, and you also believe in the common good enough that you want to invest in the system. So when I believe so much in the common good of America that I don't care if I pay $10,000 a year in public school tax, which is close to what I pay in New York City. But I don't mind that because I know it's going for the overall common good. Now, if a child is growing up saying, actually, you're oppressed because that man who was born white, who doesn't know you, made sure you were downtrodden in society, what incentive do they have to then reinvest in my Social Security as they get older? Or if I have children one day, to want to invest in their children's education. I don't believe that freedom is the ultimate common factor. I think that unity is what makes our country strong, makes our community strong. And that's why, and Neal did mention it, he appreciates that I'm doing politics. I didn't bring politics into the education. I'm responding because when I started the 1776 Project Act, I was the only one doing it. Everyone else was either in a nice, no offense, a nice cushy DC think tank, or they were trying so hard to fight it out on the school board level, but there was no money behind them to sit there and try to do anything. So that's why I think that I reject the notion that freedom is the ultimate guiding principle of education.
Neal?
Well, this really does get to the heart of it, because I think the most concerning argument for maintaining public schools is we don't think liberty is the most important American value, and I think it clearly is. We've got a Statue of Liberty. We talk about liberty all the time. Liberty, I think, is the fundamental American value, and if we don't have it, and if we don't make it central, I think we cease to be what the country is supposed to be, which is people able to govern themselves and to live lives according to what they think is the right way to live. That said, I can certainly understand the concerns about, I don't want every school teaching things that I think are bad or dangerous. And I don't think you should accept that. Where I think the danger is if we say, we're going to use government to make sure that people don't teach the things that I don't like. Because I guarantee you, when you're not the ones holding on to the leverage of government, the people who do will use it to take away what you think is best. If for nothing else, school choice is defensive. It is, I want the ability to control how my kids are educated regardless of who controls leverage of political power. And so I always urge people, if you don't like what schools are doing, absolutely talk about what they're doing wrong. Say what is evil about what they're teaching. I have no problem with people who say there are all sorts of problems with CRT. The thing that concerns me is when we say we're going to use the leverage of government to force what I think is right on other people. And I also totally understand. That's how the system is now. So you have no choice but to do that. That's why I don't really have a problem with engaging school boards, because you have to do that. What I would like to see be central is to say, yes, we're doing what we have to do, but we've always got to remember that more important, ultimately, is that we enable families to choose what they think is best. And I will say, I just want to respond to two things. Where we see the most growth of school choice is in urban areas, actually, because you have a high concentration of people. And even when you have those bad neighborhoods, you can usually get public transportation or something to go to those better schools. The rural area is a bigger problem, but even in rural areas, we have a lot more options now with online education. Homeschoolers will do homeschool co-ops where they will drive to a central place once or twice a week. for specialized instruction. So even in those more remote areas, I think school choice can work if we enable people to take the money to educate their kids to the school they choose.
Ryan?
Yes, it is already happening, and it's not going to not happen, that politicization of schools, if it's mostly private. Because as I said, private schools is where you're going to sit there and see, where you're already seeing immense pressure to push politics at the private school level. And it's the problem is in the accreditation process to become a teacher, to become a principal, superintendent, or a guidance counselor. The graduate programs in most of our major universities are the ones that teach you that to become a teacher, you need to engage in DEI, SEL, and CRT by any other means. I'll give you one quick example. At the University of Illinois in Champaign, there is one of the award-winning math professors to teach math, to teach people how to become math teachers. Her class is called the Decolonization of Math. And she says expressly, you need to make math anti-white, and you need to have a Latinx math, a feminist math, transgender. I'm not joking. This is a real college, this award-winning college professor at a state college. And to become, most people want to go take her class at this one university, and she's not alone. This is very common. The woke stuff is one thing when it's history and you want to argue about is a statue okay. It is absolutely creeping into the hard sciences, and is absolutely creeping into standards and the devaluation of standards and how they work. If you leave it up to mostly school choice and options, in most rural areas, one, you are not going to have a lot of school choices. There's just not enough children. Secondly, part of education, as I said before, has to operate at a loss. In an area of mass school choice that we have seen lately is in developmentally challenged children. Children with learning disabilities and developmental challenges. Public education in many parts of this country have expanded their options immensely and given them a massive amount of choice. They realize that children learn on an individual basis. That's great, and I think we should expand that to more and more children. There are children who learn better with using music and art. There are children who learn better. Forget about the racial breakdowns. Boys and girls, grade schools K through 12 are built for girls. Boys are doing really bad with the way we do education. And there are definitely chances for reforms. I think that if we leave to private schools and the private education and the mass incorporation of private education, you're going to see the elite universities stay the same, and that's the schools that everyone will be vying for. They'll be completely woke and progressive, and there'll maybe a handful of schools that won't be A, accredited to go to college, or B, will be lacking in the resources necessary, and it'll be like going to the University of Arizona. It'll be a joke. University of Phoenix, rather. Sorry, not Arizona, University of Phoenix. My mistake.
Starting a fight over here with Arizona?
My mistake.
I'm going to respond to a few things. First of all, on behalf of the state of Arizona, I apologize. So we've heard a lot, and I've seen it out on Twitter and a lot of debates or discussion that private schools are going woke. That is a very specific subset of private schools. When you talk about NAIS, those tend to be the very expensive elite schools. And even they're not uniformly going woke. So one of the people who is heavily involved in this is Paul Rossi. And he wrote something in the Wall Street Journal about this. And I said, well, so I should check and see who's accredited by NAIS. And certainly, I mean, I don't disagree that probably many of them are elite private schools in the $45,000, $50,000 tuition range. Many of them are probably woke, but one of the first ones I looked up happens to be near me, called the Heights School in Maryland. It's accredited by NAIS, and it's an Opus Dei school. And Opus Dei is not, as far as I know, a woke organization. And the reality is, most private schools are small religious schools. Many of them are small Christian schools. Of course, they're Catholic schools, which have been around for a very long time. And so I don't think the evidence supports the idea that private schools broadly or uniformly are going woke. I think there certainly are some, and they're the ones we hear about a lot because they do tend to educate the elites, but I don't think it's most. And then what's also interesting is core knowledge, if you know that, is a curriculum that's heavily based in facts and sort of traditional Western literature and things like that. Started by a guy named E.D. Hirsch. If you go back to the 80s, you may remember he wrote a book that talked about the core knowledge everyone needs, and a lot of people got really mad because they said it was all dead white guys. Well, so he developed this curriculum, and it is disproportionately found in schools of choice, charter schools and private schools. And so I think the evidence indicates that private schools are actually tend to be more conservative. Not all of them, there's a lot of variety, but I think that we don't have good evidence to suggest that most of them have gone woke. Most of them, I think, are conservative.
I have follow-ups for both of you. So you had mentioned that the teachers' colleges is where this all begins, and I happen to very much agree with that. So how does your taking over of school boards solve that?
Well, I will say that, so the school board PAC is not intended to solve that specific issue.
Just the argument.
Oh, okay, my argument. So one is not every teacher is an activist, you know, and I always hate the demonization of teachers by the right, because over the last 10 years, we can all think of school shootings where teachers have literally laid their lives down on the line for their students. Teachers, not all teachers are the enemy, but there is a contingency of very woke progressive teachers. By taking over school boards and by taking over the education curriculum in many of these areas, teachers who are there intensely to train people to be, you know, Ibram Kendi, anti-racist activists are going to quit, because they already are. DEI programs are being abolished in these school boards. As I said in Colorado Springs, one of the elections that my school board super PAC got involved in is in Douglas County, Colorado. We took over the school board. They demanded a review of the diversity, equity, and inclusion program. The teachers started protesting. The superintendent helped them protest because he was an activist, and they fired the superintendent. So in many of these areas, I think what I'm engaging in is the first step. There'll be other steps after this. I think ultimately what has to happen is, as of right now, is Republican governors need to strip universities of these intense progressive programs within the graduate program. It just happened today for the first, not today, 2 days ago for the first time, Wyoming banned gender studies in public colleges and public graduate colleges. They completely defunded the entire gender theory programs, which is where a lot of the stuff with transgenderism in elementary school comes from. And I think that that's what you need to do. I mean, this is absolutely an effort to, not by all teachers, but by certain core teachers, to not educate them, not make them fully functional people, but by make them activists within their ideology. It is intrinsic in what they believe, from the earliest writings of critical race theory to the Ibram Kennedys of today.
So my follow-up question for you is: without public schools, how do parents? We live in a very mobile country. How do parents move between states? Like, for example, last year during the pandemic, my family moved to Florida for 4 months. My kids were in public school in Brooklyn. We moved to Florida. They were in public school there. We moved back to Brooklyn afterwards. They went back to public school there. How does it work?
Well, so the first thing is, if you move from state to state, the public schools systems are not aligned anyway. So you wouldn't be losing anything that you have if you go from one state to another. They run their own education systems. That said, there tends to be a lot of replication of how things work nationwide, because a lot of people don't want to reinvent the wheel. They say, probably the progression we should have in, history is you might take world.
About the funding, like are you paying for like 3 months at one state, and then how would the funding follow?
Oh yeah, well, so there would be a number of ways that you could do it, but you would, presumably. One of the reasons you would move to a state is because it has a school choice program. Now, we don't see a whole lot of that. There are not that many states with school choice. But that would be one thing you look for when you move. There could, presumably be federal entities that provide, not federal, national level entities that provide vouchers. But it is true that if you leave the state, no matter what you're doing, you leave behind those states' laws. But what we're aiming for is for every state to have money follow kids to the schools that their families choose. And that's the best answer I can give you is go to a state that has the money follow the child.
Okay. So now I'd like to have you ask each other a question. What would you like your opponent to answer?
Sure. So in the last week and a half, we've seen the Republican legislatures in Idaho, Georgia, and Utah kill school choice bills. And these are legislatures that are every single statewide position is a Republican, every single majority position is a Republican, and they've all uniformly rejected. If we can't get that idea passed in Republican states where there are essentially no Democrats to be found, how do you expect to expand the school choice program to California and New York?
Right, so what's important to note is the previous year was a record year for school choice that is likely to take the number of kids going to private schools through a school choice program from about 650,000 kids nationwide to about 2.4 million kids. 2021 was the new year of school choice. In 2011, the Wall Street Journal called that the year of school choice, and then we're like, you know what? We're gonna have a pandemic and then really kick the butt of 2011 and 2021. So there's been a huge movement towards school choice. Nowhere near where we need to be. We have to understand there are about 50 million school-age kids, but 2.4 or so million kids now using a program to go to private schools, that's big. And of course we have other choice. It's not ideal to me, but charter schools now are well over 1 million kids. There's a lot more school choice within public schools. There's now actually an expectation that you will have some say in where your child goes to school beyond can you buy a house in what you think is the good district. And so school choice has actually had a lot of success. And it's not really surprising to me that, okay, after a really big year, we start to run into some problems. That said, there's a thought that Republicans are always the people who are going to advance school choice, and they do tend to be much more friendly than Democrats, and I think we need to keep working on getting more Democrats to understand that it's their constituents who disproportionately want that choice. But we've always had some problem with Republicans in that many of them, they may be happy with their public schools because they moved to a school district that's good. They may not therefore see the need for it, but it's something we continue to work on. And like I said, my vantage point is more long-term. There's no way I think that 2 years from now or 5 years from now, everyone's going to go to school of a school of choice. We need to keep making progress to enable people to understand why it's so important that they have choice. That's kind of what the people in cushy think tanks do. I don't know whether we're successful or not, but as long as it's cushy, why do I care? But we've got to keep making the argument, and then as we know in politics, you make that argument, but something usually has to happen. When the pandemic happened, it opened a lot of people's eyes to, even if you're in a good district, you need the ability to control your child's education, because you may be in a district with the best test scores in the world, but if they were saying everybody has to wear a mask and you don't want your child wearing a mask, you've got to have something else.
What would you like to ask Ryan?
Oh, right. Well, so what I'd be curious about is, where does, to you, sort of the freedom end in order to defend the common good that you talked about? So, like, what would a school not be allowed to teach, and we'll say in a private choice program?
I think that when it comes to what they can and cannot teach, I think the overarching fact, well, one, I don't think that they should touch the hard sciences and politicize any hard sciences. I don't think that they should sit there and try to teach Latinx math. That I think is a step too far. I think that the general concept of what it is to teach an overarching thing is, I think if you're going to go to school on the taxpayer dime, which would be the case even in your program, you should come out believing, at least in K through 8, maybe once you reach high school, but maybe not even then, you should come out with the idea that America is fundamentally a good country. You should obviously learn real history, slavery, and all our wars included, but come out with the opinion that America is genuinely a good country, that capitalism is generally a functioning economic system. And I believe thoroughly, my ideal goal, as I've talked to many school board members, I think especially in high school, students should really be taking 4 years of American history, which includes civics, and 4 years of global. I think that the problem so often with education is people, one, take our current living standards for granted because they don't know the true horrors of history, And secondly, I think that we come from too much of a Western perspective when teaching education. I think that people really need to understand more history in a global context to, one, understand that a lot of the bad things that people blamed on old dead white men kind of have been universal. Most civilizations across the history of the world have done a lot of all the same bad things. It's kind of unique. We all, for some reason, people never talk to each other. They all kind of figured out a system that they believed in a god, a government, marriage, and then slavery. For some reason, those are the four things they all figured out on their own. And I don't think that those perspectives, that a lot of the bad things that came, the warts of human history are global and universal. And I don't believe in the racial politics and also the transgender stuff in schools. I don't think that even if you go to a private school, if you are a 9-year-old boy or girl who says that they are transgender, you should be allowed to get hormone replacement therapy on school premises without parental consent, which is the case in some schools. Not at 9, but certainly in high school you can do that. And I don't believe that it is currently the system within academia, within K-12 schools, where guidance counselors, if a child says that they are transgender, they have to sit there and say, you have to encourage them that they are. Not to sit there and question them, not to sit there and guess it, not to say, give it a few years, to encourage them to become then transgender, which has led to a series of problems as the transgender hormone therapy is life-altering and is irreversible in most cases. It will make you sterile, it will stop certain bone growth, it will stop certain brain development. I believe that we're always going to have activism in education. I think the idea of having this classic, maybe Greek education that we want is never going to happen. Schools have always been political. They're going to be political. And as long as they're political, I would like my side to win.
Do you agree that schools are always political?
Well, it depends what you mean. So schooling is clearly political when you have public schools, because people say if I say government school that's being pejorative, and it's not being pejorative, it's being accurate. If government runs schools, of course they're going to be political, and of course you have to use political power to get what you want out of them. It's not pejorative, it's truth. And so in that regard, there's no question they'll be political. I do think that, so if you go to an all-private system, and I'll say that you can actually do that without using direct government funding through scholarship tax credits. The Supreme Court has said that is not government money. That is money that people have freely chosen to send somewhere and they get a credit for it. But even with that, even if you were to get rid of any sort of connection, I do certainly think there's a political component to education. What you teach your kids about history, what you teach them about what's good literature, all of these have ramifications for society. Where we run into the supreme danger is when we say, and the levers of government will decide what is or is not what will be taught. If we have government orthodoxy, we are in a very bad situation. And I think that's the case, even if the orthodoxy were the one that I would want, because when I lose the levers of power, which we see happen, that power can be used against me. And so there'll always be sort of a political element, but it'll be much less political when government doesn't run the schools.
Can I respond?
Yeah.
I think that is, no offense, the most redundant argument. That if Republicans try to use power, then the Democrats will use it when they're in power. Democrats are already using it when they're in power. The idea that you're going to suddenly wake up Democrats' eyes and say, wow, we could use power because Republicans did it. That's not how it works. They know that they could use power, and they are using it. And they're using it in a very corrupt way. And it's also, by the way, as you mentioned, it's not happening in the religious education. Have you seen the Jesuit schools? The Jesuit schools, I mean, it's open communism. Regis, which is the only free, Regis is the only free private school in America, only free, especially Catholic, I know that, but only free private school in America. It's full-blown race politics, it's full-blown indoctrination. Do you sit there and honestly sit there and say, no, don't use the only leverage that we possibly have? And by the way, one last thing, most of the technology companies in public and private schools are activist training as well. Most technology that you use to teach kids other things incorporate race-based politics in them. Do you sit there and tell the kids, sorry, I can't help you, you're gonna grow up hating yourself because I don't want to use the only leverage of power conservatives have. They only have the courts in some cases and elected officials. All we have is the people. It's not going to come through Silicon Valley as our hero, or in most cases venture capitalists, or Wall Street, or anything else. You have to use the government to solve this problem, and you can't wait to say the Democrats are going to realize that they could do it too.
I imagine you want to rebut.
Yes. So, I haven't said that in the current system don't use political power. In fact, I've said in the current system you have no choice but to use political power. But that should not be our goal for education. Our goal for education should be it operates sort of like we choose who will deliver our packages, or even better, what restaurants we go to. It should be something that is based in free decisions of individuals and families. That doesn't mean that some people won't keep trying to use political power to control those things. But we need to convince people that the right thing to do is that the foundation is based on individual decisions. And I don't think that's that hard to do, because most people accept that they should be able to make lots of free decisions about other things. And again, we just had the biggest year of growth in school choice in our history. People have begun to see pretty clearly that they want to have control. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't try and exercise political control in the public schools. You have no choice. I understand it, and you should do that. What I'm saying is that the ultimate goal should be to move away from that, where we base schooling and education in decisions of families and educators. And I should also say one thing. I went to a Jesuit university. I went to Georgetown University. I'm a libertarian. Which
You're a real rebel.
Well, and I probably wasn't then, but yeah, that's splitting hairs. But again, most of the private schools in the country tend to be kind of small religious schools that tend to be conservative. And we have to be careful about looking at the really high-profile schools and saying, well, this represents what private schooling is about. Because in the grand scheme of things, those are more outliers than the norm.
So, Ryan, why shouldn't we be moving away from the public school system? I get the argument that parents have been choosing it, but what if they had more options? You said yourself you're a supporter of school choice, so why shouldn't that be the goal?
No, I absolutely support school choices as an option, but the idea that you said it was a mass expansion of school choice from 2020 to 2021. Early data that's come out shows that since 2021, more parents have put their kids back into public school. I think that when it comes to certain parts of education, especially the needing of education when it comes to children who are mentally developing at a slower pace than other children, or emotionally developing, you're going to run an operating loss. Some of those children, the cost of those children's education far exceeds the weight of an average student. No, there's not going to be like the Walmart of education is going to choose to run an operating loss to help educate some children. And some things are a public good and a public cost. I think that we can all kind of sit there and agree that some things are better off. I mean, maybe not Neal, but I believe some things are better off not being privatized. And as far as the idea that if we just have mass freedom, people would make the best choices, I don't know about you, but I've been to a Walmart at midnight. That is not true. People make some very bad choices for themselves and their families. I think that there certainly should be an expansion of choice. I thoroughly believe that, but I choose, maybe I'm just not the visionary that Neal is. I choose to live in the world as it is. And even after 2021, even after COVID, the number of people who went back to public schools increased significantly. And I think that that's the trends for my lifetime. Maybe when I'm dead, things will change. But in the world I think of today, that's where it is.
So, Neal, why do you think that parents do continue to choose public schools? If they had more options, do you think that they would opt out of public schools? I would just say that in my experience, I feel very similarly. I think people think of their local public school the way they think of their local congressperson. Like, public schools in general are bad, but my public school is good. Just like Congress in general is terrible, but my congressperson is good.
Yeah, so there are a few ways to look at this. Polling, when you ask people, if costs weren't an object, or if you could take your money to a private school, would you choose it? I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it's usually around half say yes, I would do that. That is a much bigger percentage than currently chooses private schools because they would have to give up the free public school that they paid for already in order to take that private option. That said, so you have the polling, and that would suggest, yeah, a lot of people go to private schools, but polling doesn't always reflect what people would actually do. But I think that what you would see is that people would over time start to look for more private schools. So I said 70% of people give their local private or public school an A or B. So you'd say 70% would probably stay put, unless the B is not a good grade. But that means 30% of people would look for something else. That would be a huge change to private schooling. Private schooling has typically been around 10% of enrollment. If you took that up to 40%, and then you throw in homeschoolers, are usually around 3%, so say it's all 13%, you add 30% more, you're talking about 43% of people are now in private schools that they've chosen. Plus, there are those people in charter schools. Plus, there are people in magnet schools. That means choice. Even if a majority of people in public schools don't choose it, it's a huge factor. I mean, a gigantic factor. It's already very big in some places. In Washington, D.C., most people are now choosing charter schools. Of course, they compete with other states. And D.C. has had a marked improvement in outcomes, not just because of gentrification, which people point to, and that has some impact, but much more is that they have a lot of choice. And in fact, the research has shown repeatedly that more choice leads public schools to do better because they have to compete for enrollment. And so I think we would see a fairly large percentage, maybe it's that 30%, move to private schools if they had choice. That would be a game changer for the education system.
Do you want me to respond to that?
Oh, I wasn't planning on responding, so. I just was listening.
Okay.
Are we doing questions?
Are we doing
Yeah, if we do,
questions?
I was gonna say, if either of you wanna do closing
Yeah.
statements at this point and then take questions, or you
Okay.
wanna jump into questions?
Sounds good. Okay, so we started with you. For opening, we'll start with you for closing.
Well, actually, start with
Did
me.
we start? Okay, sorry.
But I don't care how we go.
It's been 3.5 hours now. It's like a telephone. So my point and my position has been that I believe we must live in the world as it is and not as we hope to see it in the next century. And that is that a majority of American children do and will go to public school. And if we want to advocate for their positions as conservatives, I think you need to do what I've been doing with the 1776 Project PAC and taking over school boards this year. We're hoping to do that to 300 schools over the course of a dozen states. Last year we did it for 7 states as a test run. Neal mentioned that the number of children who were going to private schools via voucher was about 600,000 pre-COVID. That was on the project the conservatives have had for 30 years of trying to expand vouchers, 600,000 kids. In the year that, and not to toot my own horn, but in the year that I started the 1776 Project PAC, 500,000 children were going to schools with conservative school board members. And my budget was a lot smaller than the conservative movement has had for the last 30 years of pushing for private vouchers. I think our intentions are good, but where we have spent our time and our effort has been misallocated. And I think that we must fight on curriculum, we must fight on public education, because if we do not, we are going to be, our next generation will be a generation of activists who have been trained to hate us.
Yeah.
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is, in part, I don't think we actually have that big a disagreement. It's more a matter of what horizon are we looking at. In terms of the near term, absolutely, you were doing what has to be done because of the system the way it is. And I don't argue that that's the way it is. I think that we need to consistently, though, say that the long-term goal, the ultimate goal, needs to have education that is grounded in liberty, because that's what the country is supposed to be in, and we want to live in a country where families and individuals are able to make choices and decisions for themselves. And the other thing I would note is that school boards change, and sometimes they change back. So you mentioned Douglas County. Well, Douglas County has been up and down on who's controlling it. So you get sort of a yo-yo effect, but you can win an election and then you can lose not long after that. We've seen it in Douglas County. Unfortunately, it's bad for me too, because Douglas County, Colorado created the first local school choice program, and then that school board lost. But we also saw it in Wake County, North Carolina, And it was a very ugly scene. So it became a conservative school board around 2010. People were very tired of, understandably, of a busing system where you could have had a school right next to you and your child sent somewhere else. They elect a conservative school board. You have massive demonstrations for whatever it is, the 1 or 2 years that they are in the majority, and then they lose it. So I think we can't think because we have a victory now in a school board that will remain. That's why the long-term goal has got to be to make everybody understand why it's in all of our interests for families to control the money to educate their kids.
Okay, we're gonna open it to Q&A from the audience.
Yes, feel free to come up and use this mic if you'd like, just so we can hear you.
I just want to follow up on Ryan's question. Your colleague Corey DeAngelis has done a phenomenal job pushing for school choice, but there are 24 or so states where Republicans control the state, House, the Senate, and the governorship. After the last 2 years, every one of those should be adding new school choice like crazy, right? But yet, as you said, Ryan, it's been stymied in all kinds of red states. Why don't Republicans pass those bills? If nothing else, to decrease teachers' power, the unions and the school boards. Why not pass those bills post haste?
Well, the first thing I'll say is I'm not in the heads of those legislators. If I were them, I'd be like, hey, I'm passing this school choice right now. I do think that there are many Republicans who actually think that public schools are crucial American institutions. And I don't think that they are along or that they share the same enthusiasm I have for liberty and education. And in part, that may be because there is a belief that public schooling is a fundamental American institution without which we would fly apart into balkanized sections. That's actually historically totally wrong. Public schools have forced diverse people into conflict with each other. But I think that there's that. And then another problem we've observed is that people don't recognize that they have chosen a school often when they buy an expensive house in a good district. And so they don't feel the impetus for choice because they're happy with their public schools and probably that school is working pretty well for them.
I mean, I think, as you pointed out, though, when public schools face more competition, they have to, and they do, get better. So I can't get in their heads either. Sorry.
You probably don't want to go there.
Thank you.
Hello. I have another question for you, Mr. Ryan, sir. So since in the United States,
For Mr. Ryan, or for
okay.
Neal?
oh, kind of for both of you.
Okay.
But since in the United States, public schools, K-12, are funded mostly through taxpayer dollars on I think it's usually property taxes. Would not a system in which a person is given a tax credit perhaps for their entire for their entire property tax that goes to that, if they take that to a private school, that necessarily takes that money away from public schools. And a lot of the reason why public schools are so popular is because a lot of people, their income may not match the property that they own. That many people are on a mortgage. They live in that school district on a mortgage, just on a loan. They don't have all that money. They're not an incredibly rich person, even in an incredibly wealthy neighborhood. If they have a mortgage, they're in that territory. They're just they couldn't take that money because they don't make that money to pay for a school. I guess my question is, why should we want that forced diversity that you're talking about? It does exist, but why should we not force people to force each other to get along? We've obviously not been getting along in this country for years now, and why would we want people to segregate themselves into ideological pockets?
Well, if there's anything the government does really well is make people get along with each other. I think that look, here's the deal. A lot of people, especially in very high-performing school areas in the suburbs, they work very hard their whole life so their kids can go to that school. They do. That's their main driver why they work as hard to send their kids to a private school. A lot of them are very protected and they don't want They don't want people from either rural parts or very urban parts to sit there and to move into their school districts. They feel very possessive, and some are either alumni or they feel like they've worked hard for that special class to go to those schools. And I think that's why school choice in a lot of suburban areas is not that popular. And I think that's what I just live in the reality of what it is. I think that's why it is. So.
Yeah, so I agree that that's a major reason is people choose schools by choosing a home, and they're usually happy with them. School choice is most popular. It tends to be with lower income people, more often minorities, who are usually in neighborhoods where the public schools are maybe not just not good, sometimes just dangerous. So that's correct. I think that you run into a lot of suburban opposition because they're not unhappy. And they probably did buy a house, and they think if I go to a school choice program, I may lose value in this house because that's not the way you get to that school. That said, a lot of people, it seems, would still potentially leave that if the money could follow the child. So then to your question about why not force people together, and that's really been the idea behind public schooling, was that we will bring people together, but it's actually pushing people together. And it's essentially like pushing two magnets together at the opposite poles. As soon as you let go, they fly apart. This is what we saw with efforts for desegregation, but the effort to integrate schools. We said we will bus kids to different schools to integrate them. What we saw is in those schools, no matter how much we would like the integration, it was usually sort of Potemkin. The classes were segregated, the friendship groups were segregated, you couldn't bring people together. And as soon as people had an option, they moved out of those districts. So I don't think there is a way to force people together, but you can force them into conflict with each other. So social capital people say it's like a ratchet what government can do. It can do a lot of things to take you apart. It can't put you together because it wants diverse people to do things that they don't want to do themselves. I think actually choice within education has the most ability to bring diverse people together. And I'm not saying it's great. Social change to bring diverse people together is hard, and it has to come really from the bottom up. But what you can do is try and build new identities, called cross-cutting identities. A private school is better able to do that than a public school because a private school can offer something unique, a new identity that can overcome the differences in a group. So you might think two people in different races may choose a Catholic school, and that Catholic identity both brings them together, or a Baptist school, or an arts-based school, or something like that. So I think school choice within education, again, education doesn't have actually great ability to bring diverse people together, but school choice has more of an ability because it can offer something unifying.
Thank you.
Great. Thank all three of you guys. Seeing the highlights from Ilya Shapiro's last attempt at a debate at UC Hastings, this has been especially refreshing.
I keep waiting for the outburst.
Yeah.
When do you start chanting?
Yeah.
Is that not a thing here?
Interruptions for justice. Questions for both of you, if that's okay. Theoretical question for Neal. In your ideal world, is there any sort of accreditation or regulation of a voucher program? Because as long as there's government money involved, there's the risk for corruption involved. And so especially in a low-income area, I can imagine the risk. You have one corrupt, wannabe, overzealous basketball coach who starts, NBA Academy. We're gonna get all of your kids college scholarships, and it's basically, a summer camp that the coaches get paid, but the kids don't actually learn anything, or like a video game academy. We're gonna get all your kids to become, YouTube stars or something, just garbage like that. Is there any role for the state in that process? Nitpicky question.
Should we hit this one first?
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
All right.
Sure.
So I see very limited role for government in that. Typically, a school choice program will have requirements for financial transparency, and I think that's okay. And that seems to be what you're talking about. But the reality is we've had accreditors for things without government, and accreditation tends to work well. So if you pick up a lamp and you look underneath it, you'll see that UL, Underwriters Laboratory. That is a private entity that accredits people who might essentially credits. It puts a stamp of approval on things that you buy. If you're going to buy a car, you may go to Road and Track magazine, and they'll say, hey, I'm going to tell you what's a good car or a bad car. That is essentially a form of accreditation. And so we have that in the free market. And the other thing I would say is, so public schools have lots of accreditation requirements. They have lots of bureaucratic oversight. And there are some public schools that are just almost too dangerous to send your kids to, where kids are learning nothing. So I don't think accreditation is nearly as powerful as we think it might be, but it can exist in many forms in a free market.
Thank you.
Okay.
And a question for Ryan. Nitpick some of the acronyms. As bad as CRT often is, SEL or social emotional learning, at least in my experience from when I was teaching, isn't like the worst thing in the world. Can conservatives like try to take control of social emotional learning? Like I'd like to think that what we're doing here at the University of Dallas is, virtue education, social emotional understanding in some degree. Is that necessarily like liberal mambo pambo jargon, or is there some sort of movement for
Good
taking
question.
control of that?
Yeah, no, oh, sorry. SEL is, social emotional learning is, I think, very good, especially with developmentally challenged children, those who have a difficulty expressing emotion, period, and especially for children with very, very young ages. When it gets into a problem is when in older people, when they say that your lived experience is the truth, and that's from applications of social emotional learning, that's really where it comes into the fall. That means facts don't matter, and experiences don't matter, and there is no universal grounding for anything. That is highly problematic. So yeah, with younger children, especially those who are trying to learn how to express themselves, period, little 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds, and they don't use their words and will throw temper tantrums, social emotional learning is very helpful in every experience I've ever seen. But when it comes to older children, it's extremely highly problematic, and how it's applied. Maybe it can be different. I don't think DEI really can be different. And CRT certainly cannot be different. Critical theory can't be different. But maybe there's some salvaging parts of social emotional learning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kind of a question for both of you. Recently, the United States has kind of been slipping in education compared to other countries, especially rising world powers like China. What can we do to improve not only the kinds of things that are being taught in our schools, but also the quality of the education? A lot has been said about gender ideology and race, but what can we do to improve our education compared to other countries as it concerns the quality of it?
I know this is one of Neal's favorite topics, so I've seen him speak about this many times, so I'll leave it mostly to him. I will say the one thing that I would like to see when it comes to, I'll let him talk about global comparisons, I think that education needs to be catered a lot more towards boys than they currently do. I think that boys are really slipping behind education standards across the entire country, and it's extremely problematic. And there's a lot of young men who are coming out of the high school experience and not getting jobs, not going to college, and not engaging with kind of like the landmark parts of growing up. And I think that if there's anything that needs to be done, it's especially towards young boys for that reason.
But go ahead, talk about global standards and why they're not real. No, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I watched your video.
Oh, wow. You're going into the deep tracks if it's me talking about global standards, because that was going back to the Common Core debate. But it is a really important thing. So I mentioned yesterday that we don't actually agree often on what education should be. And there's a lot of disagreement about what test scores tell us. And most of those international comparisons are on standardized tests. I should also warn, because it's sort of an obligation, those test scores for China are not most of China. The Chinese scores are only specific areas. It's supposed to be a representative sample of every country, but in China they say you're getting Singapore, or you're getting particular areas that tend to be the best educated. So I just warn about that. And those are kind of fleeting. So 12 years ago, everyone's like, Finland got the best scores on a particular test called PISA, which is the Program in International Student Assessment. It's a very specific kind of test. It's basically all word problems. It's sort of geared to the way the Finnish system works. And then the Finns had success, and then they dropped a bunch. And so it's sort of illusory to say, well, okay, we're not doing as well as other countries because the test scores aren't as good. Those test scores fluctuate, and it's true our system doesn't focus as much on test scores, But there have actually been many people in China who said, how do we capture outside the box thinking or creativity that seems to do well in the US education system? So I would just sort of warn about using these international assessments to say we're doing well or not. That said, we may not be doing a great job of teaching hard skills, and that evident research I pointed to earlier suggests school choice is a way to help drive the improvement in those areas because it forces schools to compete. I do think we have to kind of think of, well, what do we even want out of education? And I think we do have a system that sort of lends itself to creativity, other than one other thing I should say. We attribute a lot of good and bad things to the education system that the education system really doesn't affect. So one of the reasons we have lots of entrepreneurs is entrepreneurial people like to live here, like to move here. And we have a generally pretty free economy for them to do entrepreneurial things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So my question is mostly well, it's for Neal, but I'd like if you could both respond, please. So your primary objection to Ryan's position, if I'm understanding, is that Ryan's position does not give us a permanent solution, because sometimes conservatives will win the school boards and sometimes we'll lose, and when we lose, the left will recraft the curriculums back to what they want. But isn't your position vulnerable to the exact same kind of objection? Because suppose that we promote school choice and we're successful in that, well, the next time we lose the election, then the left will take that away. It seems like your primary objection against Ryan's view doesn't really score any special points against him, to which you're not equally vulnerable. And just one more thing, just very quickly, if I could.
Maybe we'll answer that and come back to the one more thing.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. So there's a phenomenon in which it is hard to get people to fight politically for something they don't have. It is easy to get them to fight to keep something they do. So you very rarely see a school choice program, other than, like I mentioned, Douglas County. Very rarely you see them go away. Because once people have something, they like to keep it, and you build up a natural political constituency to keep it there. And so you wouldn't have the same thing in a school board. That school district typically has existed for a very long time. So you may be losing your majority, but you're not losing those schools. And so I think that a school choice program would tend to survive changes. Like the DC voucher program's been threatened many times. Whenever a Democrat takes the White House, they're like, I'm going to get rid of this thing. And then they fail at it. Because it's bad optics, first of all, to kick kids out of schools, but because it has a natural constituency to fight for it.
Okay, you want to ask your follow-up?
Yeah, it's well, to perhaps give one reason that might undermine that optimism, I would say that I think that political conflict when it comes to education is going to be a permanent fact of society. And that the reason for that, I think that market solutions work very good when it comes to things like food distribution, because I don't care what other people are eating, but I do care how other people's kids are educated. I don't even have kids, and yet I care how other people's kids are educated. So for that reason, I think that the curriculum battles are never going to go away, even if we have a free market solution to schools.
I agree with you. You made it better. You said it better than I did. Maybe you should be up here. The point is that what you said with curriculum and with education. The reason that the Pledge of Allegiance started in schools was not because of the founding of the country, it's because of World War I. And it was really a state implementation, basically, in private schools to sit there and start making kids say the Pledge of Allegiance to create a uniformed identity among children. And as far as rollbacks in education go, Sam Brownback, the governor of Kansas, former governor of Kansas, was the most aggressive school choice program at one point in the country. He was the most at war with public schools in this country. And he didn't even lose. He won re-election, but he broke the state of Kansas. And Republicans have really never rebounded from it ever. And that is in part why in the aggressive war against public education, rather than saying let's improve it, is the reason why until Glenn Youngkin's election, why most parents don't trust Republicans when it comes to schools. I just think that that messaging is very detrimental to the overarching goal on many other various issues. So I agree with you on what you said.
Well, so you're not a plant, but this gives me a chance to promote an event we're having March 22nd, which is not on our website yet, but about how school choice in other countries and through history has led to more peace and education, and where we have come to a norm in most countries, at least European countries and Canadian provinces, where you choose a school. And a lot of that was because in many countries, education was torn apart by battles over whose religion would be taught in the public schools. And the solution that most places came up with, or many places, I should say most, and again, we're talking about places that had public schools, was you chose schools. You could choose a non-religious school, you could choose a Catholic school, you could choose a Protestant school. If you go to the Netherlands, you can choose any school for which you can get, I think it's 20 families to say they want that kind of school. And so, yes, we actually have lots of real world evidence of school choice enabling people to get what they want, leading to more peace, and for them to continue to get what they want.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Manfred Wendt, but this is a question from a friend who's watching online. This is primarily for Ryan, but both are welcome to answer. There are lots of school districts run by conservative school board members that still don't teach their kids to read and do math, let alone teach them to read the Constitution or instill virtue. If that's not because of a lack of competition, why do you think that is? What do you think should be done about that?
I think that is a good question. I mean, I don't know if it's a lot of schools that don't teach them math and reading. My general assessment is this. Some people like to have this delusion with children that every child could be a rocket scientist. I know for my sake I couldn't have been a rocket scientist. I know I was never going to be a rocket scientist. I still don't know what Algebra 2 is, and I don't think I use it that often. I think that there are limitations and abilities to children that make some kids better and some kids worse. I think how you apply education can make children excel or not excel. And I think that for choice reasons, I think that's very, very exceptional and important. When it comes to how to improve it, I think part of the reason some kids do bad in school is not because it's a bad school, it's because it's some bad kids and from families who don't actually care about if their kid can read or write or do math. And for some children, for some families in America, and I've met them, school is a babysitting program. That's how some people treat public and private, well, mostly public education, but they treat them as saying, this is where I'm going to keep my kid for 8 hours a day, hopefully 10 hours a day, hopefully 12 hours a day, so I just don't have to deal with them. Some are working classes that have to keep kids in school that long and for genuine reasons, but some do treat it like a babysitting program. I think that when it comes to getting better school board members elected to encourage a better curriculum, I think the bigger problem was for a long time was that conservatives never pushed curriculum and never pushed public education. I think the most altering thing really was COVID, because for the first time you had millions upon millions of parents in this country getting first-hand experience what their teacher was actually pushing their children in school. And they were learning in a first-hand experience and they were outraged. And that is why all these parents are interested in. Everyone thinks it's the masks. Before the kids were back at school because of the masks, they were already protesting and already upset because it was the CRT stuff. I think that now seeing how endemic the situation is and having it come to the forefront, and I'll give a shout out to Chris Rufo because he really made this issue something people cared about. That's really where it will elevate. And now the job is, one, finding good people to run for school board. And then secondly, once they are elected to school board, there is no association of conservative school board members in the country, despite it being the largest population of elected officials at all. And every time when I do the PAC calls, the 1776 Project PAC calls, I talk to a parent or a school board candidate, and they say, you'll never believe what's happening in my school board, and it's the same story every single time. I think that getting better candidates and making them run and winning is one thing, and then once that happens, I think creating an association where they could find out who good superintendents are, what good textbooks are, what good internet and social media companies are. I think all those things and the sharing between parent organization is very necessary.
Thank you. Good friend to ask that question.
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of what both of you have said tonight resonates. I want to deal with the now. I have 4 kids, but I also want to plan for a better future for our future generations. School choice is very interesting to me, but what concerns me is the lack of transparency in curriculum, and in order to make an educated choice, I think transparency in curriculum is really important. And in so many cases, we don't have that. And I want to know what you think about that and how it relates to school choice.
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't know that there's a lack of transparency, a broad lack of transparency in private school curricula. I'm sure it varies from school to school.
Or even public school. I mean, we have, State Board of Education
Oh.
mandated curriculum, but it's not always followed, or it's not always published publicly for parents.
All right, well, so I'll deal with that one.
Yeah.
So I actually wrote something about this saying, yeah, obviously we want transparency about what the schools are teaching. Now it does get a little challenging because you have the official curriculum, but as they say, once the teacher closes the door, it's hard to know what's happening. The solution that was proposed, I think it was Indiana or a couple other states, but to have a camera on at all times, Iowa. I think that is problematic because I don't actually know how somebody would psychologically teach knowing all the time that there's a camera on them. I mean, I want the transparency, but I can see the problems. That gets a little beyond my area of expertise. But I do think we want transparency. I think people should know what's happening, but I also don't think that transparency means a whole lot if you can't act on it. And the most direct way to act on it is you should be able to choose something else. But certainly, if you can't choose, you need that information so you can try and get your schools to change by the school board.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that should be more implemented, it's going in some schools, is that when children are sick, back when I was a kid, like you had to get a friend to bring you the textbook after school so you could read whatever the chapter was.
Right.
Now, a lot of teachers are putting the entire lesson plan online, so you could go to school on days you're suspended from school or missing, or vacation lasts longer or whatnot. I think that the entire lesson plans have to be on online for parents to look at it as well. I think that that is the only way you're going to possibly get full visualization, and parents they should be able to know ahead of time where the textbook is and what extra books they're reading for not just summer vacation, but also for extra. But sometimes they'll have like sections of books that they'll read during class. All those should be publicly available, and I think the entire lesson plan should be, because it's not only a thing for parents who want to know; it's for kids who sometimes are at home for long periods of time, and that's what I think that the answer is for me anyway.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Last question?
So this is kind of a question I have, and it's something that's been bothering me for, I'm probably one of the oldest people here. But over time, history hasn't changed. History has remained the same. Math has been the same. When you reference changing textbooks, I think that's one of the problems. Why do we have to change textbooks when math stays the same? Why do we have to change textbooks when history remains the same? And I think doing so allows things to interject ideas that maybe are not consistent with whatever the general belief is. Do you not see that changing textbooks presents a problem?
Ryan? Question?
Yeah, the thing is, a lot of times in postgraduate, what's the acronym for it, where teachers go back to school to continued education, they will say this is the new way that you excel in teaching math. And it's a whole new way. And this is the new textbook we're going to sit there and use because of it. Also, Texas is one of the most important states in the country for the reason of textbooks. Whatever textbook comes out of Texas, usually follow about 2 to 3 dozen other states. They buy the same textbooks as they buy them in bulk. So California is the one big state, and Texas is the other one where other states follow because this is the state that they're buying textbooks from. And that's a big part of the reason. Also, that new superintendents and new principals decide that there's better learning plans to sit there and push for education. And that's the non-woke ones, not the ones those are regular, parents and principals and superintendents who want to do the newest form and the newest way of teaching kids in education. But we're very close to not having textbooks at all in the very near future. So that's
which is another problem.
yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been really great. What an excellent conversation, and the questions were really amazing.
Yes, just wanted to thank all three of you. There's a little reception just kind of out that direction, so we'll see you out there. Thank you again for being here.
You guys did great.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I need that.
That's a good one.
Thanks, my friend.
Thank you. Yeah, you let me know.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good job.
Still. Oh, great. They do a really good job.
I know. They really do.
Yeah.
And my son's thinking about going into education.